With each new period comes a fresh batch of chess geniuses who challenge the status norm and push the game to new heights. The 2023 Chess World Championship between teenage Indian master Rameshbabu Praggnanandhaa and seasoned Norwegian Magnus Carlsen proved to be a momentous battle of ages. Many worldwide are interested in this matchup because it pits youth and potential against history and mastery. In this video, we will look into this epic chess match. Let's jump right into the action without wasting any time. The strategic opening chess moves unveiled. The first movement was a pawn to e4 from Pragg. Magnus's reaction was a pawn to e5 in the following move. The knight was created at f3 by Pragg, followed by the knight at c6 by Magnus and the bishop at c4 by Pragg. These steps marked the beginning of the Italian game. Next, Magnus moved his knight to position f6. In an early variation of the bishop's opening, Pragg moved his pawn to d3, while Magnus moved his bishop to c5. After this, Pragg moved his pawn to a4 to stop Black's pawn from reaching b4. In response, Magnus followed the canonical plan by moving pawn to d6, which enabled him to castle on the king side. Pragg kept going with pawn to a5 to prevent him from taking down the b4 pawn. Magnus doubled Pragg's center pawns on move e4, starting an exchange by moving his bishop to position e6. Then came castling. Pragg activated the knight on a d2 board. After 9 moves, the match went on a new and exciting aspect, when Magnus reacted with a knight at e7. In response to Magnus's knight at g6, Pragg decided to counter with its own knight at h4. Magnus then played h6 in reaction, and Pragg went on to play c3. Pragg sent its queen to e1 in preparation for a move to g3, where it was to be used to take out Magnus's king. The battle clashed in style. In the meantime, Magnus advanced his pawn to d5, drawing a response from Pragg's bishop on b3, which prompted Magnus to move his queen to d6. With the queen safely delivered to g3 by Pragg, Magnus moved his knights to h5. Magnus deliberated carefully about what to do next before settling on knight to h5. The pressure was maintained, and the queen was kept in the crossfire as Pragg retaliated with g5. Magnus played g6, and Pragg immediately moved his knight to f5. Magnus took Pragg's bishop on f5, and Pragg quickly regained control by capturing Magnus's pawn on the same square. Magnus moved his king to position g7, where he might shield the weak f6 square with his queen. Then Pragg moved his king to h1, presumably to take it off the risky diagonal. Magnus played his queen to f6. Pragg was forced to either swap queens or withdraw to g4 with its queen to counter this. So the knight took the square f6, the pawn took the square g6, and so on. Magnus resumed the trade by taking Pragg's knight on f6. In response, Pragg captured e4, securing a knight. To deter a rook to d1, Magnus sent his knight to d7. A rook to f2 was the reply from Pragg. After a series of rook captures and king movements, Magnus eventually got his king to h6 by playing rook to f1, the Pragg's knight and Magnus's defense. While Pragg moved his knight to f1, Magnus attacked Pragg's rook from d6 and defended the b7 pawn. Next, Magnus placed stress on Pragg's e4 pawn by moving his rook to d4. In response, Pragg played a rook to f1. Rook was forced to return to d7 with the next move, a knight to e8 from Pragg. Finally, Pragg moved his rooks to position e2 and his bishop to position c2. After Magnus moved his knight to d7, Pragg moved his knight to c4, giving it a position of power for the first time in the game. Magnus had to protect the pawn by moving his rook home to position a8. To limit Magnus's pawn development, Pragg moved pawn to g4. Magnus reacted with a pawn to f6. After moving his rook to g2, Pragg's pawn system came under attack from Magnus's knight, who had been positioned on h6. Pragg quickly advanced over to pawn on b4. The pawn on a5 was bolstered, and his knight was given more freedom to move. Pragg was reclaimed with the c-pawn after Magnus's capture on b4. In response, Magnus moved his king to f8, setting up an endgame. The decisive moves leading to victory. Magnus advanced his king to position g7, while Pragg kept it at g2. While Magnus moved his rook to h8, Pragg moved his pawn to a5. Pragg shifted his rook to e2. Magnus then moved the knight to h5, and Pragg immediately countered with the king on g1. Magnus moved rook on a4, then d2, while Pragg moved rook on h3. Under intense strain, Pragg decided to advance his pawn to a6. Magnus quickly checked on a6, and Pragg attacked Magnus's c6 pawn with the bishop moved to a4. Magnus responded with a rook to c3, attacking the knight of Prague. With his rook on c2, Prague took the pawn at c6. Next, Magnus moved his knight to g5, risking a fork by positioning his knight at f3. After Prague played a rook to c2, Magnus offered a check, but Prague countered with a knight to g3. Magnus moved rook to a3, giving Prague another check when Prague advanced his king to f1. Prague captured the knight on c6, and all Magnus had to do was evacuate the king. Prague gave up the match on move 47 after realizing he could not win. He had to surrender since he would have lost his bishop or face checkmate. Accepting Magnus's win, Prague stepped down. That's all for this video. Leave your thoughts on this moment. Also, take a minute out and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned. See you soon.